We say we want innovation. Corporations say they're innovating, but is it an illusion? What factors are thwarting innovation, and how do we remove those barriers? These are big picture questions worth exploring, and that's what we're going to do here today. Welcome to the next episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be live for future episodes on your favorite social media platform. To find out when those are happening and how you can get involved, you can join us in our groups on both Facebook and LinkedIn, although we are on other platforms as well. Go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to join us and find out when we'll be live so you can join us then. Today's episode is brought to you by my upcoming book, Flexible Leadership, Navigating Uncertainty and Leading with Confidence. This book gives you a new perspective and skill set to lead in challenging times in a more effective, flexible, and confident way. Pre-ordering your book now guarantees you the best possible price and to be an early adopter of these groundbreaking ideas. Learn more and pre-order your copy now at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. Let me introduce Elliott to you, and then we will dive in. Elliott is the founder and CEO of High Alpha Innovation, a venture builder that partners with corporations, universities, and entrepreneurs to co-create startups that solve compelling problems. He built his career in strategy consulting at InnoSight, the firm founded by Clayton Christensen, in corporate venturing and as an entrepreneur bringing new ideas to market. To date, he has launched over 40 venture-backed startups. Originally from California, he currently resides with his family near me in Indianapolis or Carmel, Indiana. He earned his BS in finance from BYU and his MBA from the UCLA Andersen School of Management. He is the author of the new book, The Illusion of Innovation, Escape Efficiency and Unleash Radical Progress. He's our guest today, and I'm so glad you're here, Elliott. Thanks for being here.
So am I. Thanks for having me.
So let's start. I mean, obviously that short introduction says a little bit about your journey, but I really want to know a little bit more. Like you didn't wake up when you were 10 and say, I'm going to be a venture strategist, like a little bit, like how do you end up here, and maybe a little bit how you end up in a book, but just a little bit about your journey to give us context and to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah. Okay. So I began my career. I had a really fun job. I was working with at a company called Andersen. And those who have been around for a while will know about Andersen.
It was one of the big five, the big seven, the big three. It all depends, right?
Yeah. I mean, 100-year record as a accounting and consulting firm, and imploded over the course of about 6 weeks. And for me, that was a remarkable teaching moment because here I was brand new out of undergrad. I thought I've landed my job. This place is rock solid. It's going to be here for a while. It's going to give me all sorts of options. And then a couple of years in, it was gone. And learned that big companies can be pretty risky and pretty fragile. They can appear very stable, and often they're not. And a few years later, I was working at got my MBA, started a couple of companies in business school, and ended up getting a job in corporate venture capital later. And first week on the job, I'm in the office headquarters, looking out on the parking lot, thousands of cars in the parking lot, knowing that this company had been started by someone 25 years before in his garage. And thinking, that's remarkable. What an impact. Each of those cars represented a person, their loved ones, and the ability to do what they wanted to do in life because this company existed and was not only solving important problems in the world, but enabling the people there to have opportunities. And I thought that is an admirable thing to do, to start businesses that can grow and scale and solve big problems. And I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. As far back as I can track, it's in the blood, can't get away from it, and decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur also. And maybe there's a way to do this at scale where we could launch a bunch of companies and create as much opportunity for as many people as we can while solving really important problems. Along the way, I had an amazing opportunity to spend many years working with an incredible thinker and person named Clayton Christensen, who came up with this idea of disruptive innovation, which we all know about now. Came up with the idea of the innovator's dilemma, the notion that companies will do everything right and ultimately still fail because they leave themselves exposed at the low end for new entrants to come into the market with good enough products that grab hold, move up market, and displace those incumbents. Really hard problem to solve. And so my career has been spent on building new ventures, thinking about innovation, how it really works, and how can you use these things to impact larger companies and enable these large corporations that we depend on and need to be successful, by the way. How do we enable them to be more successful in innovating?
So big picture ideas today, and yet practical solutions before we're done. I want to open, Elliott, by having you tell a story about someone that I think you may even have said this, but you certainly will agree with the statement that especially Americans really ought to know, but we don't. His name is Gerald Shur, and obviously you can't tell the long version of the story, but give us the short version of the story and why it's an important metaphor for what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think a lot of us have this sense that our large institutions, whether they're government, corporations, whatever they are, seem less capable today than they were back in the past. 100 years ago, it seems like we could build bridges in a short amount of time and for not very much money. And now it takes years and costs money and more money, and something's different. Something's changed.
I heard this morning, this of course will date this from a podcast perspective, but I heard this morning that it's going to be 4 years before the new bridge will be replaced in Baltimore. 4 years. Anyway,
Which is
just a
actually
connection to what you just said.
relatively fast compared. If you look at the one quick aside, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, they just put a net on it to prevent suicides. And I think if my numbers are right, it took longer to add the net and cost more than it did to build the bridge originally. So something is different. Something's changed. Gerald Shur is a great example of this. Gerald founded the Witness Protection Program. He was a lawyer in the Justice Department when Robert F. Kennedy was there running it. And he'd had a history with the mob, grew up in New York City where the mob had intimidated his father, who was a tailor in the city, hated the mob, and decided the only way to bring it down was to create a program that would protect those who wanted to testify against the mob. Create this amazing program, Witness Protection Program, that has led to the arrests of thousands of criminals, brought down big crime rings. And he did this almost single-handedly inside this organization, where he was kind of ran the thing with an iron fist for many years. He was actively involved in that organization, kind of built it in the way that he wanted to, and then ran it that way. It's really hard, and we've all benefited from it, right? So here's this kind of outsized, weird innovation that came out of the Justice Department. It's really hard to imagine somebody being able to do something like that today inside the Justice Department, isn't it? Or inside a big
or any place else, right? We don't need to, right? It doesn't even have to be Justice Department. It could be any place.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. I love that story. I was unaware of that. And I love that. So I'm glad that we started there because it does, I think, frame this conversation really well, just like it frames the book well. You talked about the innovator's dilemma, Clayton's idea. In the book, you talk about something called the capitalist dilemma, sort of sits on the shoulders of that, if you will. Talk about the capitalist dilemma.
Yeah. So this is an idea Clay was working on before he passed away in 2020. Capitalist dilemma is this idea that one of the reasons companies have such a hard time innovating and doing things differently is that they are optimizing for certain metrics that prioritize short-term financial capital efficiency, short-term results. And specifically, what we see is that if you'd ask anyone, how do you go to business schools, right? What do we teach MBA students? How do you measure the success of a company? Well, return on invested capital, return on net assets, internal rate of return. We want to generate a lot of capital. That's how we measure success. And we've gotten very, very good at doing that. And as a result, companies now have more money on their balance sheets than ever before. It's increased dramatically just in the last decade even. And yet at the same time, we see corporate lifespans shrinking. So they're making more money than ever, but they're going out of business faster. That's a really interesting question. Well, why? why is that? The answer is that they're so optimized for efficiency, for making things as capital efficient, as predictable, and as safe as possible, that when a crisis comes or a new competitor comes online, they find that they can't compete. A good example of this during the COVID crisis, right? We saw supply chains crash. Now, these supply chains for these big companies were amazing, built over decades to be super efficient, things arriving just in time all around the world. In the book, I talk about an auto parts supplier that had 181 plants around the world, creating millions of parts a day. Super, super efficient. It's like a miracle of human kind of ingenuity, right? And then one little part of that system breaks, and we find that the whole thing comes crashing down. So it may have appeared to have been capital efficient in the near term, but when a crisis comes long term, that is not capital efficient. That is, in fact, very fragile. And that's the problem. We've optimized our companies for return on invested capital, return on net assets, that tell leaders it's better to remove assets from your balance sheet and improve your metrics than it is to go do something risky and build something new. Over the long run, however, it's that building the new that creates resilience and creates organizations that endure. And I want to build things that endure. I don't want to build things that are super efficient for 3 months and then go out of business.
Well, or in the case of those supply chain examples, that looked like they'd been effective for a long time until any one little thing changes, right? So the subtitle of the book is Escape Efficiency. We've just been talking about that a little bit, and Unleash Radical Progress, excuse me, which to me is really the heart of the book, which is a good use of a subtitle, of course. But I want you to say a little bit more about this resiliency or resilience versus effectiveness or efficiency, excuse me.
Yeah.
I mean, you just hinted at it, but let's go a little deeper there, recognizing that those who are watching and listening might not all be making those decisions about a supply chain, but like how do we say more about this idea and then think a little bit more about that, how we can use it wherever we sit in an organization?
Yeah, well, I think it applies to our personal lives too, actually. Let me tell you a story. There's a guy from Iceland named Hafthor Bjornsson, who's 6'9". He's an enormous guy. His nickname is the Mountain. Some people might know him by that name. He's pretty well known. He holds the world record for the heaviest deadlift. And if you go around Google, you can find the video of this deadlift. It's a remarkable thing to see. Over 1,100 pounds, 501 kilos. The previous record was 500 kilos. He wanted to break it just by 1 kilo to spite the guy who had the previous record. When he got done with the lift, he's like, I could have done more, but I just wanted to just beat him, just barely. No one had ever done that in the history of the world before. An amazing feat. Now, he has some natural abilities that enable him to do this. Being 6'9" helps, right?
It would help compared to, I don't know how tall you are because I can only see you from the shoulders up. I'm guessing you're not 6'9". I know that I am not.
I couldn't do it. I would never do it. But he also had to prepare for a couple of years. He was working out, doing these strenuous workouts where he had to train his mind and his body to interact better, to tear down muscle, build it up. He had to eat 5 meals a day, full meals, 10,000 calories a day. By the time he did the lift, he weighed 450 pounds. Crazy. He does this lift. He gets done, and the stress of it was so intense that he bled from his eye sockets. So now
you're saying we can watch this on YouTube?
You don't see the bleeding from the eye sockets,
okay.
fortunately, but you can see him do the lift.
I'm kind of glad about that, actually.
But here's the remarkable thing. When we run our businesses or when we operate in our lives as well, I think this is true of us individually. We try to minimize the stress and tension in our lives or in our businesses while increasing the insights that we accumulate that enable us to learn and to do new things. And the reality is you cannot minimize tension and increase insights. You need to think about Hafthor Bjornsson. If he had pursued that same strategy, I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to take it easy on my body, and then I'm going to go do this lift. There's no way he would have broken that world record. He had to put his body through stress and tension to be able to do the hard thing that he wanted to do. It's true in our businesses too. And the issue is we try to run these companies so efficiently, so optimized for predictability and safety. And by the way, what this looks like is slow to make decisions, everything done by committee. Those are features of a large organization, not a bug. That is optimizing for safety and preserving what exists, being really careful.
100%. Yep.
And boy, that type of organization does not gather insights. That type of organization does not learn, does not uncover anomalies or the surprises that lead to new paths for growth. So you have to, as a leader, or I think it's true in our own lives, we have to accept some degree of deliberate inefficiency and be okay with that. Now, there are ways in companies, actually, you can do this systematically.
Before you go there, I just have to tell you that I literally this morning, and maybe it's because I was channeling this conversation. I mean, I've read the book, but I don't know that it came from that necessarily, at least not consciously. But I wrote for my Monday, Wednesday, and Friday newsletter. I wrote this morning, and the idea was to seek out struggle.
Yeah.
It's the point we're making. It's the exact point we're making, right? To seek out struggle, that it's only through that we gain learning, that we gain growth, that we get insights, to your point. So now take this home back in organizations.
Yeah. So on that, Clayton Christensen, right, this wonderful thinker, he had a sign outside his office at Harvard Business School that he made that said anomalies wanted. And boy, if you walked into his office with some idea about how one of his theories was wrong, he loved it. He sought that out because it was that conflict, that tension that made the theory stronger and a more accurate representation of how the world really works. The problem is in our organizations, when we think about the way that we innovate or the experiments that we run, often those experiments are designed to reinforce what the organization already knows, or already believes to be true. We need to instead run experiments that lead us to question, that uncover anomalies, that challenge what the organization believes. Everything in the organization is optimized for preservation. We've got to find ways, new systems to break out from that. So you think about, go ahead.
No, and the tension of that, optimized for, the word you used was optimized for, and I don't know what word you use now, but optimized to be safe, to stay in business, and yet our businesses are lasting shorter and shorter periods of time.
That's the irony, isn't that crazy?
That's the irony, right? Exactly.
Yeah, we think we're running these things. We are being safe. We're being careful. We're being deliberate. Well, it turns out that's extraordinarily risky, and it is destined to lead to failure. Think about it in business. We think in the world I operate in, world of venture capital, we think about options strategies on a 2x2, right? Where on one axis you have you're with the consensus, you're against the consensus. On the other axis, you're either right or wrong. Now, if you are with consensus, let's imagine you're running a company and you're going along with your competitors, you're believing all the things they believe, and you turn out to be right, congratulations, you've gone out of business. Now, it might take a while, but you do that over and over again, you're going to go out of business because everybody else is doing the same thing. And somebody else is inevitably going to do it better than you. The only way you win in business is by going against the consensus, being contrarian, and turning out to be right. That's a really hard thing to do.
By the way, that second part's really important.
Yeah, you don't turn out to be wrong. Then you're going to go out of business too. But the thing is, over the long run, that is the only path to success. And so you've got to find ways to surface those non-consensus views, those contrarian views, those anomalies, those surprises. It's hard to do.
I love that. I want to come back to that. But I want to put up a question that came in from Keith Glover. It's a little long, but I think we can get to it. How do we hit the sweet spot of bleeding from the eyeballs, reaching unbelievable goals, and blowing our eyeballs completely out of our eye sockets?
Well, so that's the thing. You don't want to blow your eyeballs. You need your eyeballs, right? You need to be able to see. And that's true in companies. You don't go too far. Don't go to the other extreme. The extreme we often operate on is to say hyper efficiency, remove all error from the system. The person who personified this really well was Jack Welch when he was running GE back in the 80s, 90s. He said famously, variance is evil. What he meant by that was we're going to remove all error from the system. Well, that's one extreme. That's not good. But you can imagine what the other extreme would look like, which is complete chaos. That doesn't work either. You're doomed to fail that way too. So we have to find where the sweet spot is in the middle.
Between the two of those.
Yeah, I think there's and ultimately it comes down to the question, how much innovation do we need and how soon do we need it? The more innovation you need, and the sooner you need it, the more deliberate inefficiency you need to bring into your
The
system.
more you need to leave quality, lean practices and allow for variation, right? The more and the sooner you need that. And
Yeah.
you're not saying that those are bad things.
No, not at all. And most of the innovation we benefit from are incremental improvements or efficiency improvements that lead us to be able to do more with less. Or think about, if I go to the doctor and I'm having surgery, I don't like, I want that to be super safe and predictable. I don't want that surgeon to be innovating in the operating
On
room.
me,
Right. So there are environments where you want just focus on efficiency. It's good to do. We've got to find ways to carve out some room for that deliberate inefficiency. So think about an organization as it scales up. The governance systems, how we make decisions, the talent we recruit and retain, the incentive systems we use, the processes we use to get things done. All of those are optimized for preserving what exists, for making things predictable. And then we know that these organizations need to innovate. And so often what we see inside these companies is we know we need to bleed from the eye sockets at least a little bit. Everybody knows this. And so what we do is we say, we're going to take this system we've created and we're going to point it toward learning. Well, this is a system that has been designed to execute often at scale, often globally. That is a very different activity than learning, which is inefficient, which is making mistakes, which is doing things that don't make sense. And you cannot take that system designed for hyper efficiency and execution and direct it toward learning and expect it to work. You have to create an entirely new system for that type of innovation that requires a high degree of inefficiency, where you're operating in a world of ambiguity. The way we think about it a lot is you've got two types of problems that companies face. You've got learning problems and execution problems. An execution problem is we know the problem and we know what we probably need to do. We just have to go do it. Corporations are designed to do that better than anything else, better than anyone else. On the other hand, if it's a learning problem where we know what the problem is, but we're not quite sure how to solve it, it's still ambiguous. We've got to go figure it out. Small teams, startups will win almost all the time against large corporations with those types of challenges. And so if you're running a business, you have to first look at, is this a learning problem or an execution problem? Because if it's a learning problem and I'm inside a big company, we've got to find a different way to solve this than we typically would.
I love that. I think to me, that's one of the really big ideas that we all can take from this. And we can take from, and back to when we were talking earlier about how we can apply this in our personal life, I think the same thing is true. We can ask those same two questions of ourselves,
right,
as individuals, as families, as colleagues, or whatever we want to do. We've talked a lot about, and there's a lot of things in the book, and we're talking with Elliott Parker, the author of The Illusion of Innovation here. And there's a lot of stuff that you talk about here that help us see that this is a very prevalent problem, and that it's not necessarily been getting better. You make a lot of really cogent points and talk about that a lot. And yet, at the end of the day, you're optimistic about the future. And even though you say, hey, it's taken us longer to do stuff in big corporations, we're trying to play it safe, we're focused on maybe focus some of the times on the wrong things, and yet you're ultimately optimistic. Why?
Yeah, for a few reasons. First of all, what does it mean to be optimistic? It doesn't mean I expect everything to be good from here on out. I do expect
unless everyone reads your book and takes action.
Yeah, well, hopefully that might help. I hope. I think being optimistic means that we assume there are going to be really big problems in our futures, but that our capacity to address those problems is going to increase over time. And if you look through history, the trends, that is true. If you look back over time, optimists on average have been much more correct than the pessimists. And so if you want to be more correct and more prepared for the future, you should want to be an optimist, because you're more likely to be correct. The underlying factors that have helped us increase our, for example, world GDP exponentially over the last 500 years, the underlying factors have not changed. In fact, you could argue that we will see accelerated change because of what's happening. Things should our capacity to address problems will increase over time. And so on average, things will get better. There will be problems, but on average, things will get better. There's been no better time to be alive, and things from here on out, I'm envious of our grandchildren and what they will see and experience, because our capacity to address problems will increase on average over time. But I think we could do things better. And I think we could make it a little more accelerated in ways that benefit humanity.
I want to share with something that you wrote on page 4. And no, I'm going to read it. I'm not going to make you tell me. It's not a quiz. At the very beginning of the book, which I think is well stated, and I completely agree with. And I think it's a good way for us to start to round the corner to the end of our conversation. So I'm just going to read what you wrote on page 4, and then have you comment on it, add to it, sort of connect it to the dots of what we've talked about today. And everybody, he has no idea. And he's not scrambling to find page 4. So he doesn't know what's coming. Here it comes. There is more enduring truth and light outside the narrow subject of business than within it. There is so much to understand from science, history, biology, and adventure that can be applied to the way organizations work to solve important problems.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that, or you want to connect that to what we've been talking about?
Innovation, in the end, it comes from the collision of ideas. And my view, again, in the spirit of seeking anomalies and seeking surprises, you're more likely to find them in areas that you don't know a lot about. And so we think about, if I'm running a bank, for example, I'm going to focus on everything financial services and how to improve incrementally, how to operate that bank. Well, boy, there's a lot of good ideas to be found in other industries, other fields, in history. One of the best lessons I ever learned about business, I learned in the Amazon jungle, tracking insects in the Amazon. Totally unexpected. I didn't go there thinking that was going to happen, but it became an important life lesson for me, and a lesson in how to run businesses more effectively. So there's much more truth outside. Business is a very narrow part of the world, very narrow part of our lives. So we can learn a lot from history and other places.
Elliott, is there anything, there are lots of things that we could have talked about. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked that I didn't?
Let me give you one more good analogy, just I think to think about this challenge of innovating. And hopefully when the listeners see this pop up in the news, it'll strike a thought and they'll think about it. Wildfires in the Western United States give us a good lesson both about our capabilities as humans and also the challenges of misplaced priorities. If you go back in history, prior to the gold rush out in California, some estimate that 4.5 million acres of land burned a year naturally through lightning strikes and things like that. As people moved into California and other states in the Western United States, we got really good. As soon as a fire pops up, we put that fire out for very good reason, to preserve life and property. And if you look now in the Western states, on average, it's like, or by the 1950s and 1960s, we'd reduced the amount of land burning each year to about 250,000 acres per year. So from 4.5 million, 250,000. Amazing feat of human ingenuity. The problem,
unintended consequences, my friend.
Unintended consequence was that those forests have become incredibly dense, 10 times more dense than they used to be, so that when a fire does come down, we don't put it out right away. It burns with intensity and faster than anyone could have ever believed. And so now we talk about a fire season. Isn't that crazy? We talk about it's the fire season in the Western United States. My great-great-grandparents are buried in a town called Paradise, California, which was devastated by a fire, one of these fires a few years ago. Yep. Now, here's the lesson for our companies. We operate our companies with a very similar strategy. As soon as a fire pops up, we put it out. Meaning, as soon as we see errors in the system or mistakes, anomalies, things that challenge the organization, we put those out as soon as we can. Similarly, our companies over time build up this Tinder innovation debt, so that when a crisis comes like COVID, some part of it breaks, the whole thing comes crashing down much faster than we could have possibly imagined. We all know what the answer is in the Western United States, what the strategy is. It's a strategy, we need to engage in a strategy of controlled burns, where you map out a checkerboard and you burn certain areas of land on purpose so that it reduces the fuel for these fires when they come. We all know that's what we need to do. The problem is the incentives don't enable us to do that. For any individual land manager, there's too much risk to do that. I think last year in California, something like 20,000 acres were burned deliberately through this type of controlled burn strategy. Some people estimate that for California to regain its balance, an area the size of the state of Maine would need to burn. And so until that happens, we've got this incredible fire debt in the state. Same thing in our companies. We've got to think about how do we get good at operating, running controlled burns, at running these types of experiments that enable us to learn, uncover, and reduce some of that innovation, that debt, that tinder that's sitting there that is going to be our destruction when a crisis comes.
It's good, everybody. That's really good stuff. And so if you've enjoyed this conversation, you're going to want to get a copy of The Illusion of Innovation. The things that Elliott has talked about so well here are in the book with plenty for you to think about. This has been maybe a little bit different of a show than we do sometimes, a little bit higher level thinking, bigger picture than we do sometimes, not always, of course. And I hope that you all found it useful, but we're not quite done with Elliott yet. I have a couple more questions for you, sir. But I'm really going to shift gears now. And so I want to know what you do for fun.
So more fun than anything for me is surfing. I may be the only person.
You don't do that in Carmel, Indiana.
Not a lot of that in Indiana. I may be the only person in Indiana with a bunch of surfboards in my garage. But when I get a chance, I'm looking for good waves around the world. So I grew up surfing, and there is nothing more fun than surfing. I wish I could do it more.
There you go. And the other thing, the only thing you knew I was going to ask you is about reading. Like, what are you reading these days, or what's something, Elliott, that you've read recently?
I read a lot of books. I've always got 3 or 4 books I'm reading at once. Currently, 2 of the books I'm reading that I'm loving, it's kind of different. One is The Military Maxims of Napoleon. I can't recommend this book enough. Napoleon Bonaparte sat down and wrote out what are the lessons that he learned leading military of France. And it turns out not all of them are applicable to running companies.
Thankfully.
But a lot of it is so applicable to strategy and thinking about businesses, remarkably so. And if you read it with that lens, you will learn a lot. I've learned so much. And it's broken down. I take 1 or 2 of these a day, just read through it and think, how does that apply? Super interesting. Fascinating person, right? Another book that I'm diving into right now, very relevant, written a few years ago, maybe 6-8 years ago, even maybe not that long, but called "Competing in the Age of AI" by a couple of professors at Harvard. Provides some wonderful frameworks for thinking about what do we do about this AI revolution that is just starting, and it's really helpful.
You make 2 observations for everybody. Number one is reading a book about AI that's not recent gives us a different perspective, and obviously reading a book from Napoleon gives us a different perspective. So Elliott is practicing what he's preaching about looking outside of business. Number one, but number 2 is there's a lot to be said. Although I'm a proponent of and a purveyor of the ideas in brand new books. Like you, Elliott, I'm a big fan and believer in reading stuff that's not the latest thing out, or that everyone else is currently reading. So I appreciate that. Before we go, where do you want to point people? Where can people learn more about you, connect with you, your business, the work that you do, the book, etc.? Where do you want to point people?
You find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, ER Parker. You can go to erparker.com to find more info about the book. It's available all the places books are sold, Amazon and all that. Or you go to our company website, hialphainno.com. It's also a good place to go.
hialphainno.com, erparker.com. Those will be in the show notes, everybody. I hope that you'll check that out, as well as we always put the links to all of the books that we talk about here there as well. Before we go, though, everybody, I have a question for all of you who are listening or watching. It's a question I ask every week because it's an important question. And the question is, now what? What action will you take as a result of this conversation? What idea did you get that you need to go act on? Because until we take action, it doesn't really matter, right? Like having ideas are wonderful and having new insights are useful, but only to the degree that we put them into action. Hope that you have thought of some of those things today and are now ready to go out and take action. Hope you'll do that. And Elliott, thanks again for being here. Such a pleasure to have you as a neighbor, so to speak,
Yeah.
to have you here. And to all of you, thanks for being here. Hope you'll come back next week. If you're here on the podcast, you know what to do. You make sure you like the podcast. Make sure you tell somebody else about the podcast. And if you're watching this and don't know about the podcast, wherever you watch podcasts, you can find it. It is the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, and we'll be back next week with another episode. We'll see you then.